Joining me now is Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat of Connecticut and member of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. Senator, thank you for being here tonight. Let me first get your reaction to the notion that billionaires are bending the knee to Trump. Billionaires who, in one case or another, often own press outlets like the Washington Post. There's Patrick Soon-Shiong at the LA Times, who seems to be currying favor with the MAGA right. What does this tell you about the government that is emerging in next January?
I think we talk a lot about the coming dictatorship, but I think what's really coming is what you would call an oligarchy. That's a term you probably forgot from high school, but what it means is that a handful of really rich people run the government, and they steal from ordinary people using their access to government in order to make themselves and their families even richer. That is likely what we are heading for in the United States of America. I don't think it's a coincidence that Trump's cabinet is filled with billionaires. There's more wealth on that cabinet than 169 different nations. And you sort of see all of these folks that could decide to stand up for our democracy instead, as you mentioned, bending the knee and deciding that they're going to put their profits ahead of their loyalty to country. Donald Trump just put one of their handpicked guys in charge of the agency that oversees mergers in this country. The word is out that corporate consolidation is back in vogue, even if it screws consumers. And that's part of the reason that you see these billionaires lining up to donate to Trump, to meet with Trump, because they know that he is going to put them first and he's going to put everybody else second, third, and fourth. That's, I think, what's coming here.
What sort of shocks the conscience is the way that it is so explicit. I mean, Trump literally posted on Truth Social, any person or company investing $1 billion or more in the United States of America will receive fully expedited approvals and permits, including, but in no way limited to, all environmental approvals. Get ready to rock. Literally sacrificing the integrity of our land for corporate profit. I mean, I guess the Trump argument is that's going to all flow down to the worker. But we know better than that at this point, don't we?
Yeah, of course. I mean, trickle-down economics has never worked. It's just a lie made up by really, really rich people to make you think that if you give them tax breaks or regulatory breaks, that they'll pass it down to workers. Ask average, ordinary workers in this country whether they've gotten the benefits of the Trump tax breaks from 2017. They haven't. This specific proposal is just absolutely bonkers, right? Because what he's saying is you'll get regulatory breaks in this country, but only if you are a billionaire. If you are a mom and pop factory that wants to add on a new wing to hire more local workers, you don't get that deal from Trump. If you're a local housing developer and you want to build some more houses to lower the cost of mortgages in your community, you don't get that special deal. What he says with that social media post is billionaires get one set of rules. All the rest of us get a different set of rules. Like, how much more plainly could you make it that this is an oligarchy that's coming, in which 6 or 7 really rich people play by one set of rules that allows them to enrich themselves, and all of the rest of us, including small and medium-sized businesses in this country, get screwed? He's just telling you what he's doing. And listen, I think we should start listening to him. It's
an oligarchy. It also toys with, distinct nepotism. There's a New York Times, a great piece of investigative reporting in the New York Times tonight that reveals that Trump's Middle East advisor, an individual named Mossad Boulos, who is the father-in-law of Trump's daughter, Tiffany Trump, is the lore around him is that he's a billionaire and that he has all this foreign, business experience. But he basically runs a truck dealership, I believe, in Nigeria, which made under $66,000 in 2023. Mr. Boulos' stake, according to security filings, is worth $1.53. I mean, hand it to him for not being a billionaire and getting a job in Trump's administration. But it's sort of like, kleptocracy. This person has no qualifications that I can see from the reporting that we have to be the Middle East advisor at a time when you're in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. What are the implications of having someone like this managing the portfolio of one of the most volatile and key regions in the world?
Yeah, obviously this guy seems like he's a fraud, right? He manufactured his educational background. He's not really rich. It's very noble to run a truck dealership. Nothing wrong with that. But even if he was a billionaire, that wouldn't make him qualified to be the primary Middle East advisor to the President of the United States. This guy has no experience in diplomacy in the Middle East at a moment where that region is on fire. All throughout the Middle East in particular, you're seeing this kleptocracy because it's not just this guy. After Trump left office, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, went and did a massive deal with Saudi Arabia, in which Saudi Arabia promised billions of dollars to invest in Kushner and his properties that the Trump family benefits from. There is no doubt that this administration's policy towards the Middle East is going to be compromised by the fact that they are making money off of the very people that they're sitting across the table from and supposedly having a conversation about the interests of the United States. I mean, it's just extraordinary that we have allowed for the normalization of Trump's financial empire to be woven into the statecraft of this country. All that matters is how much money he makes, how much money his family makes, and it comes at a cost to the rest of us. We'll see really bad policy made in the Middle East because he's got unqualified people there. But more so, he's going to put his wealth and his family's wealth first, the national security of the country second.
And his ego. I mean, the idea that he's inviting Xi Jinping, the leader of China, who this week there's bombshell reporting about Operation Salt Typhoon, which is one of the most significant hacks of this country ever, right? It's Chinese hackers breaking into American telecom systems, getting access to all kinds of records, even encrypted ones. That whole sort of genre of spycraft was largely grown and instituted by Xi Jinping in China. The same week, Donald Trump is inviting Xi Jinping to attend the inauguration, which honestly, and I'm with Tim Miller on this, I think Trump conceives of as more of a coronation than an inauguration, in the way that kings and emperors used to have foreign dignitaries and heads of states come and watch them take the crown. It feels like that for Donald Trump, but it is an astounding study in contrast in terms of what matters to Donald Trump.
Yeah, listen, I wouldn't have, a massive problem with inviting President Xi if he was part of a longer invitation list of great powers in the world. That's not what's happening. The only great power that's getting an invitation is the dictatorship. The only country in Europe that seems to be getting an invitation is the one that is very quickly sliding away from democracy. It is just this big middle finger to the country, telling everybody that these are the kind of governments he models and that he looks up to, places where ordinary people have no power, where if you try to stand up to the leader, you get thrown in jail. He told us during the campaign that the biggest threat to this country wasn't China, it wasn't Russia, it wasn't a terrorist organization, it was Democrats. That's what he said. And then he put in charge of the Department of Justice and the FBI people that would go after Democrats, and he is just doubling down on that by inviting the Chinese and the Hungarians rather than our actual Democratic allies to the swearing in.
Are you going to be at the swearing in?
Somebody asked me that today, and I actually hadn't thought about it. I've always gone to swearing-ins. I think respecting the transition of power is important. But if between now and then we continue to get this kind of disdain for the rule of law, if the swearing-in ends up becoming just a signal that day and the day after is going to be the last days of democracy in this country, yeah, I think every single person who loves this nation and who loves the Constitution should probably think twice about being part of that kind of anti-democratic spectacle.